The fluorescent lights of the emergency room weren't just bright, they were a clinical, soul-searing white that exposed every tremor of Alara's hands and the secret she was desperately trying to keep contained within the fragile cage of her ribs. She sat on the edge of the stiff examination bed, the crinkly paper protesting with her every slight shift. The thin cotton gown she wore felt like a betrayal, offering no protection, no anonymity. She was 24 years old, a woman who curated her life to be as small and quiet as possible, and here she was, in the most exposed, vulnerable, and terrifying situation imaginable. Intimate emergency. The words on the intake form had burned under her gaze. How could 2 words hold so much humiliation? She'd written them with a hand that shook so badly the letters were almost illegible. A severe UTI that had escalated with terrifying speed into a kidney infection while she was alone in her studio apartment. The pain was a hot, twisting knife in her lower back, a relentless fever making the world swim, and a deep, shaming dread that this was somehow her fault. The door handle clicked. Alara flinched, pulling the gown tighter around herself, as if the flimsy fabric could be armor. She fixed her eyes on the floor, on the scuff marks near the base of the cabinet, tracing their patterns to avoid looking at the person who now held her dignity in their hands. Alara. The voice was calm, a low, resonant baritone that seemed to physically push back against the sterile, humming anxiety of the room. It wasn't the brisk, detached tone she'd expected. It was warm, like dark honey. Against her will, her eyes flickered up. He wasn't what she'd pictured. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with hair the color of dark sand and eyes that held a startling, gentle intelligence. He wasn't just handsome. His presence had a quiet weight to it, a stillness that was instantly calming. His white coat was pristine, a stethoscope draped around his neck, but his hands, as he looked down at her chart, were what held her attention. They were capable, steady hands. "I'm Drive, Thorne," he said, his gaze meeting hers. He didn't smile, but his expression was one of profound, undivided attention. "Can you tell me what's been going on?" Alara's throat tightened. She'd rehearsed this in her head, a clinical, detached list of symptoms. What came out was a broken whisper. It hurts. My back. And I have a fever. I think it's a UTI. It got bad. She braced for the dismissive nod, the hurried scribble on a prescription pad. Dr. Thorne. Drive. Thorne. Didn't move. He pulled a stool closer and sat, bringing himself to her eye level. The simple act felt like a monumental kindness. "I'm sorry you're feeling so unwell," he said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. "Let's figure this out and get you some relief, okay? I just need to ask you a few questions. Is that all right?" She managed a tiny nod, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. It was the okay that undid her, the asking for permission, in this place where she felt she had none. He asked his questions with a quiet, professional grace, his eyes never leaving hers, making her feel like she was the only patient in the world. He listened, truly listened, as she haltingly described the escalating pain. When it came time for the examination, her entire body went rigid with fear. He seemed to sense it. "Alara," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This is my job. There is nothing to be embarrassed about. I am only here to help you. Just focus on my voice. Tell me about your job. What do you do when you're not visiting us in the ER?" It was a lifeline, a distraction thrown to a drowning woman. I'm a book restorer," she whispered, as he began the gentle, necessary prodding at her back. "At the old city library." His hand stilled for a fraction of a second. "You bring things back to life," he murmured. "That's beautiful." No one had ever called her work beautiful before. It was usually met with a puzzled, "You mean, like, gluing pages back in?" A sob caught in her throat, a mix of physical pain and this sudden, overwhelming wave of being seen. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, mortified. Dr. Thorne finished the examination and helped her sit back up. His touch was sure, but impossibly gentle. "You have a pretty significant kidney infection," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need to start you on IV antibiotics and fluids right away. You're going to be admitted for a day or two." The world tilted. Admitted. The cost. The time off work. The utter, complete loss of control. I can't," she choked out. "The money." "Alara," he said, and his hand came to rest, for just a moment, on her shoulder. It was a warm, solid weight. An anchor. Your health is the only thing that matters right now. Let us take care of you. The kindness in his voice was a weapon against the fortress of her solitude. It shattered her. She broke then, the tears coming in silent, shuddering waves, her face buried in her hands. She cried from the pain, from the fear, from the loneliness of a life lived in the margins, and from the shocking, undeserved compassion of this stranger. She felt, rather than saw, him move. He didn't leave. He didn't call a nurse. He simply handed her a box of tissues and sat in silence, a quiet, steady presence in the storm of her humiliation. He gave her the space to fall apart without judgment. When the nurse came in to start the IV, Alara was calmer, hollowed out but stable. "Doctor." Thorne gave the nurse quiet instructions, his eyes lingering on Alara for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "I'll check on you when you're up on the ward," he said. "You're going to be okay." He left, and the room felt colder, emptier. The ghost of his compassion lingered, a balm on her raw nerves. As the cool antibiotics flooded her vein, a different, more terrifying warmth began to spread through her chest. It was a feeling she had spent a lifetime avoiding, a feeling more dangerous than any infection. Hope, and something else, fragile and terrifyingly sweet. A crush on her doctor, the most cliché, foolish, and utterly inevitable thing in the world. 3 days later, discharged and physically healing, Alara was emotionally adrift. The memory of Dr. Thorne's kindness was a persistent, glowing ember in the gray landscape of her life. She knew it was ridiculous. He was a doctor. Being kind was his job. He probably forgot about her the moment he signed her discharge papers. Which was why, when a courier delivered a small, elegant package to her doorstep, she assumed it was a mistake. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a book. Not a new one, but an old, beautifully bound collection of Emily Dickinson poetry. Tucked into the pages was a simple, cream-colored card. "I saw this and thought of the woman who brings beautiful things back to life. A small token, wishing you a speedy recovery. Drive. Thorne." Her knees gave way. She sat on the floor of her tiny hallway, the book held to her chest, her heart hammering against the old leather. It was inappropriate. It was unprecedented. It was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to her. A week of internal debate followed. Finally, mustering a courage she didn't know she possessed, she called the hospital's main line, her voice trembling as she asked for the administrative office for her doctors. She left a message, her words tripping over each other, thanking him and, in a moment of sheer madness, inviting him for coffee if he ever had the time, leaving her number. She never expected him to call. But he did. That very evening, his voice on the phone was the same calm baritone, but now laced with a hint of something else, nervousness. "Alara, it's Ben. Ben Thorne. I got your message." The coffee became a walk in the park. The walk became dinner. And with every meeting, Alara felt herself stepping out of the shadow of the shy, sick girl in the ER. With Ben, she wasn't the patient. She was Alara, the book restorer who had an encyclopedic knowledge of 19th-century binding techniques and a laugh she usually kept hidden. He listened to her with the same intense focus he had in the hospital room, but now his eyes held not just professional concern, but genuine fascination. He told her, from a family of overachievers, and had chosen medicine over the family business. He lived in a nice, but understated, apartment. He drove a sensible car. He was kind, grounded, and seemed as captivated by her quiet world as she was intrigued by his confident one. For the first time in her life, Alara felt truly, wildly, recklessly in love. It was 2 months into their whirlwind romance when the fissures began to appear. They were small things. The way he'd sometimes get a call and step away, his voice dropping into a tone of cool authority that spoke of boardrooms, not hospital corridors. The impeccable, impossibly expensive cut of the casual jacket he wore one weekend. The fact that he never talked about his past in any specific detail. The unease coiled in her stomach, a quiet serpent of doubt. The fairy tale was too perfect. The prince was too charming. The climax came on a rainy Tuesday. They were at her apartment, surrounded by the comforting smell of old paper and the tea she was brewing. He was helping her sort through a box of donated books, his presence now a familiar and beloved part of her space. His phone, sitting on her coffee table, lit up. The screen flashed with a news alert from a financial journal. The headline was stark and clear: Thorne Industries announces new green initiative amidst billion-dollar merger talks. And there, next to the headline, was a small, but unmistakable, picture. It was Ben, but a version of him she'd never seen. His hair was perfectly styled, he was wearing a razor-sharp, charcoal gray suit, and his expression was one of cool, corporate command. Alara's blood ran cold. $1 billion. The world tilted on its axis. The mug she was holding slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor, an explosion of ceramic and hot tea that mirrored the shattering of her heart. Ben looked up, his face instantly paling as he followed her horrified gaze to his phone. Alara, he began, his voice strangled. Thorne Industries, she whispered, the words scraping her throat raw. $1 billion. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. The family business, the overachievers, the subtle, unshakable aura of power he carried. He wasn't just a doctor from a comfortable family. He was, an heir, a millionaire. No, the headline said $1 billion. He was so far out of her league they weren't even on the same planet. I was going to tell you, he said, standing up, his hands out in a placating gesture. I loved how you looked at me. Just as Ben, the doctor, not as the other thing. The other thing. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her chest. You mean the fact that you're a billionaire who plays doctor for fun? Was I a fun project for you, too? The shy, pathetic girl from the a charity case. No. God, Alara, no. He took a step toward her, his eyes desperate. The medicine is the only real thing in my life. The money is just noise. An inheritance. A cage. Meeting you. You were the most real thing that has ever happened to me. His words were passionate, pleading, and she wanted, more than anything, to believe them. But the humiliation was a tidal wave, drowning everything. The memory of her tears in the her whispered fears about hospital bills, him sitting there, a billionaire, handing her tissues. He had seen the most impoverished, vulnerable moments of her life, financially, emotionally, physically, and he had said nothing. You lied to me, she said, her voice trembling with a grief so profound it felt like it would break her in two. By omission, you lied. Every time I talked about scraping together rent, every time I worried about the cost of that hospital stay, you just held me and said, it will be okay. You were my safe harbor, Ben. But it was all built on a lie. You were a tourist in my struggle. I fell in love with you, he said, his own voice breaking. That was never a lie. How can I believe that? She cried, wrapping her arms around herself. How can I ever know if you loved me, or if you just loved the novelty of being loved by someone who didn't see you as a wallet? You had all the power, from the very first second. And you kept it. The silence that fell between them was absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain against the window. He looked at her, and she saw the truth of her words hit him. She saw the doctor, the billionaire, the man she loved, completely and utterly defeated. There's nothing I can say, is there? He finally whispered. Alara looked at the shattered mug on the floor, the pieces scattered like their relationship. Like her trust, she thought of the book of poetry, the beautiful, thoughtful gift that now felt like the first piece of an elaborate trap. She shook her head, the movement costing her everything. No, Ben, there's nothing. He stood for a long moment, his shoulders slumped, the weight of his secret finally crushing the very thing he'd wanted to protect. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of her apartment, and out of her life. The door clicked shut. This time, the sound was final. Alara stood alone in the silence, the ghost of his compassion now a mocking specter. The fairy tale was over, and the twist wasn't that her prince was rich. The twist was that his wealth, and the lie that shielded it, was the poison that made their love story a tragedy. She was heartbroken, not because he was a millionaire, but because the man she thought she was falling for, the kind, grounded doctor, had never really existed at all.